Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Marisha, if you're new here, and today we're having a super busy evening in the kitchen, doing everything from kind of sorting through these tomatoes that I got off the tomato plants that were still green, to making delicious almond rolls and a dinner. So I hope you enjoy and you come in and enjoy this video. Everything I make is gluten free and dairy free because I have those intolerances, but and dietary requirements. So if that's something you're interested in, I post a lot of videos about different foods that you can make food from. But if you're not and you're just interested in cooking and baking in general, I also do a lot of just all of that. So come in, come in. So today we're starting off with kind of sorting through these tomatoes. So it's reached the end of my tomato plant's lifespan for this year, in where we live in England, because it's just so chilly out and we're getting frost now, and the plants are they're long gone really. They're very yellow. But I still had lots of green tomatoes on my plants, so I'm sorting through them. I picked off all the tomatoes that looked somewhat decent, even if they were completely green, because I figured at least they'd have a chance to ripen inside, and lots of them did. But anyway, the first thing I'm doing is sorting through and finding the already red ones, getting rid of any that aren't in great condition. And then with the already red ones, I'm just going to put them in a freezer bag and I'll use them at a later date. I have like 3 bags of tomatoes in the freezer now, and I'm not really too sure what to do with them. Usually I tend to make them into tomato sauce or something later on in the year. You can make tomato soup as well. So I'll get around to using them at some point. But anyway, I'll speed up through this. And as you can see, I've also got a pot of chilies that we're also going to preserve up a bit. Anyway, so I washed those tomatoes off, the red ones, and I put them in one of my reusable freezer bags. These are really great. I got them on Amazon, I think, and they work really great. They are just, you can stick them in the dishwasher once you're done with them, to clean them, and they have like a nice thick seal, so you really feel like it's sealed in there well. So it's great for things like tomatoes. I mean, obviously tomatoes can't really spill; they're not a liquid, and I wouldn't want to use that on meat, for example, but for tomatoes and things, this is great. So that's what the kind of thing that I tend to use them on. So I'm just squeezing out any excess air and doing them up. And then for the green tomatoes, we need to sort through them as well. So I did some research because I've never had this many green tomatoes, so I've never really bothered saving them. But I think they just took a little bit longer to grow this year, so there were more green ones than I would usually have left over by the end of the season. So what I did for the green ones, like I said, I did some Googling, and it said that you really want to kind of trap some of the air around those tomatoes because that's what helps them ripen. But you also don't want it to be sealed because you want them to be able to breathe. So it said it's best to put them in a paper or cardboard kind of box or bag, like a cardboard box or a paper bag. So I had a shoebox left over, like a cardboard shoebox from Timberland. So I washed these green tomatoes up and then we're going to get them into that box. And they do ripen actually really well in there. I've had lots of tomatoes. I've been giving them away and gifting them to different people, friends and family, because I've had so many tomatoes really. But yeah, they ripened up just fine. Some didn't stay in great condition, so I had to get rid of those, but that's kind of expected and that would happen on the plants anyway. But lots of them did ripen up really well, so if you are ever in a situation where you have tons of green tomatoes, I would suggest putting them in, like I say, a paper bag or a cardboard box. And then you just need to check on them quite often just to make sure that they're not, going mouldy or anything in that bag. And obviously, so you can pick out the ripe ones and use them or give them away. So this is a long process of slowly washing all these green tomatoes in the colander, and then I'm getting them laid out on this dish. What's the word I'm looking for? A dishcloth, a tea towel, and getting them all dried up. So yeah, I have a lot of green tomatoes. And I did the same for the chili plants, so because it was getting quite cold outside, I pulled off all my chilies that were on the plants outside, because chili plants really don't like the cold. And then I do have, I think, 4 or 5 chili plants that I had in pots, so I've brought those inside, so they're still producing red chilies, but all the green chilies I pulled off the plants, and all the red chilies as well, of course. Other than the inside ones, I left some of the green ones on those ones because they will ripen inside, even though it'll be a bit slower because it's quite chilly. And then what we're going to do with those is we turn them into like a pickled jalapeno, but these aren't jalapenos. I don't know what type of chili pepper they are. I just call them chilies. I actually originally started growing them just from some seeds in a chili pepper in Tesco years ago. And then I grew them into plants. I kept those plants for 2 years, then took the seeds off one of those chilies and grew them, and that's what the chilies are this year. So anyway, once I've got all these green tomatoes washed, I'm letting them dry, and now I'm going to clean up these chilies. But yeah, we make them into basically a pickled jalapeno minus the jalapeno pickled chili, and they turn out really good, really spicy actually, very, very spicy. I know that jalapeno is quite a mild pepper, but I would have imagined these to be even milder because they're just like a basic chili pepper, but it turns out really spicy. So, but my partner loves spicy food, so that works out for him well. Great on like pizzas or tacos or like on top of a burger, really great. And I think they last quite a while, for like a couple months. So yeah, I'm just getting these into kind of circular rounds, like the pickled jalapenos I buy are always in circular rounds. And then I have a little jam jar here that I'm going to use. And I'm using both red and green because I figured why not. And I am leaving the seeds in, so obviously that's one of the reasons why it's a bit spicier. So then I'm going to do, I'll link the recipe below because I am following a recipe. I think the recipe was half a cup water, half a cup vinegar, apple cider, and then a teaspoon of salt and sugar. So I believe I'm following that, but I will link that below because I'm not 100% sure. And this is the first time I've ever made just pickled peppers like this, so it was a new experience for me, but they turned out great and super easy. And I just store them in the fridge, so I'm not like canning them or anything. These are just for the fridge. So I'm just doing a teaspoon. Also, probably half of that salt didn't even go in the pot, but that's okay. And yeah, I'm using apple cider vinegar, and the one that I use at least is safe for celiacs and vegans. So it's dairy free and gluten free. So that's the one that I tend to use. The sugar is definitely a good call because these did turn out quite spicy. I'm not a huge spice person. I like mild spice a lot. And then when it gets up into the medium category, And I'm definitely not a spicy person. I just can't handle it, I guess. But I do like things like this. Kind of pickled peppers on pizza and stuff, I think I love kind of that touch of the heat, but not too much. I definitely wouldn't want to eat these straight, that's for sure. I do initially put the lid on wrong, so then I have to wipe round and re-put it on, and then I can shake it to kind of mix it up. And then I just write the date on these and pop them into the fridge. These jam jars I have are from The Range, if you're interested. I think they're Kilners though, so you can probably find them in a lot of places. I think this is the point where I realise it's leaking and have to adjust. It was my fault, I put the lid on wrong. But that happens sometimes. Anyway, I wiped that up and make sure it's all good. And they turn out so pretty as well because of all the green and the red. They look really nice in the jar, so. They turned out really great. And you could definitely do a lot more than just one jar. I did have more chilies. I just didn't know how much I'd like it, so I didn't want to do more than one jar. So I'm just using another tea towel now to dry off the rest of these tomatoes, and then I have my cardboard box here that I'm just popping them into. And you can see that some of these tomatoes are quite a decent size, which is half the reason I really didn't want to part with them. A lot of them are cherry tomatoes, but I have some Romas and some, what's the variety? I'm not 100% sure, but the beefsteak kind of style. So I didn't want to part with all these tomatoes, so I did end up trying to keep most of them. And some of them are more orange. So obviously those ones I know will ripen, but some of them completely like dark green ones didn't ripen in the end. They kind of just went a bit funny. So that happens, that's okay. And I'm not sure if there's much you can do with green tomatoes. I'm sure that there is recipes for green tomatoes though. I guess if you felt like they weren't going to ripen, you could also maybe do something with them. I imagine they're quite sour, but I'm sure there's something you can do with them. I didn't actually have that many cherry tomato plants this year. You can just see how prolific they are. They just do so well. And I know that you can just lay the tomatoes out on the table if you don't have too many, or if you have a table, I guess, that's big enough and you don't want to use to ripen them, you could definitely do that as well. I'm sure some of you know a lot better than I do about ripening them. This is my first year kind of having to do that. Yeah, I just don't think I had that many before. If I did, I never really cared or noticed. Most of the time, once it gets colder out, I don't really even go outside because I know that I kind of got the rest of the stuff. But so maybe I've just missed it in the past. Either way, I just want to make sure these are nice and dry before they go in the cardboard box. And then I can just put them aside and check on them every couple of days. So, once we sort through that gigantic mound of tomatoes, we can move on. So, all the stuff from the garden is sorted now. Chilies are done, tomatoes are done. So, I'm feeling good. We got a couple of those jobs off the list. Those are the tomatoes that will ripen sooner, so I just kind of cut them aside. And those are the leftover peppers I still had left that I wasn't sure what to do with. But that's all the garden stuff dealt with. So then we can move on. So then we start making our almond roll, so our almond filled cinnamon roll dessert, which turns out beautifully. So I didn't actually have that much spare time on this evening, but I had enough time that I figured I would get all this done, and I did go quite late with it all. But yeah, these don't really take too long to do once you get them started. I guess it depends on the rise time and how warm your house is. But anyway, the first thing we do is get measured out some almond milk, and then to that I just add a spoonful of sugar and then a yeast. So I do just about 2 tablespoons worth of milk, almond milk, then 9 grams of yeast and about a tablespoon of sugar. And I set that aside. I normally warm my milk first. I'm not sure why I didn't warm my milk first. I must have forgotten. But you obviously can't do it once you've added the yeast, so I just set that aside next to the radiator, and that keeps it quite warm. Anyway, mixing that through, and then I just cover it with a bit of cling film. Next thing we get started on is the psyllium husk. So I do I do 13 grams of blonde whole psyllium husk. This is just like a gluten replacer in gluten-free recipes. It works really great if you have a recipe that you that really needs gluten, like bread doughs do, and it's just like it forms like a gel, and it just makes things kind of stretchier and kneadier. Anyway, I add to that about 180 grams of milk, almond milk again. Psyllium husk does bind better with water, but I've always found it to work just fine with almond milk. So if you prefer to do water, you could, but the milkiness is really great in a cinnamon roll. And I use almond milk because I can't use normal milk. But if you're using normal flour, you wouldn't need to worry about the psyllium husk. That's really just for kind of to replace the gluten. And again, I just kind of cover that and set it aside, and that will form like a gel-like substance. And we'll add that into our dough. And I use blonde psyllium. I use blonde because if you use the normal psyllium, sometimes it can be a bit like purpley, and it can turn your bread a bit purpley. Because it's just a grain at the end of the day. Well, I think it's a grain or a fibre. It's something. It's a healthy sort of fibre. And then I use the whole because that I can only get the blonde psyllium whole, and I can't bother to turn it into a powder. But you could definitely turn it into a powder. You could just blend it and turn it into a powder. But because I'm using whole, I have to use 13 grams. If you're using a powder, you could probably just do like 10 or 11 grams. Next, I'm adding in 350 grams of plain flour, gluten-free flour. I use Dove's Farm. Use whatever you've got. And then to that, I'm going to add the rest of my dry ingredients. You could use gluten-free bread flour as well by Dove's Farm, or whatever you use. But anyway, to that I'm going to add 120 grams of tapioca starch. Tapioca starch is just a bit lighter, a bit stretchier, so it works better in the dough. Again, makes it more like a normal cinnamon roll, more fluffy. These turn out super fluffy. And then I mix that all through so that is distributed evenly. And then to that I'm going to add a couple level teaspoons of xanthan gum and 2 normal teaspoons of baking powder, kind of not heaped teaspoons, but more full teaspoons of baking powder. So that's the xanthan gum. Xanthan gum works as a binder. And baking powder, we have yeast in this, so you don't really need the baking powder, but it just makes it fluffier. Like I say, these turn out super fluffy. Anyway, mix those through, just again distribute them evenly. And then I add the rest of the sugar. So I do 70 grams of sugar. I like the dough to be quite sweet, but you can do whatever you want. You could also replace with more like honey or maple syrup. And then I'm going to add some vanilla bean paste. I love vanilla bean paste. You can use vanilla extract or essence or whatever. But I don't know, the vanilla bean paste gives you kind of like the nice flecks and the stronger vanilla flavour. So I tend to use that. But vanilla essence is always good too. And then I'm using about half a teaspoon worth of almond essence or extract as well. Then I'm adding some more milk. I'm adding 200ml milk. I would start with 150 if I were you, and then add the last 50. This did turn out a little on the wetter side. I'm not sure if my scales were playing up though, to be honest. I think they were, because I had problems throughout the day. I really need new scales. And then I'm just going to add an egg. I think I just do the one egg. And then butter. I do 4 tablespoons worth of butter. Or roughly. I kind of just cut it up. But roughly 4 tablespoons worth of butter. And this is the Stork gluten-free, dairy-free butter. I use the block form. I just find it works more like a normal butter. So once you've got your vanilla, plain flour, tapioca, xanthan, baking powder, sugar, milk, butter, egg and almond extract into the bowl, you can add back in the psyllium husk. You can see that it's formed kind of like a gel-like structure now. It hadn't completely finished resting, but that's fine. It can mix up in the bowl and become more gel-like. And then providing your yeast has risen properly, because I always use active dried yeast, which is why we needed to sit it in the milk. So provided that's risen and is frothy, you can get that mixed in. Mine isn't crazy frothy because I used cold milk, but I knew that it would warm up, so it was fine. It was still frothy and it was still active. I had a while when I first started making gluten-free breads and stuff, I was really struggling, and one of the main reasons I was struggling was because my yeast was dead and I had no idea. And I just thought I was a problem, or the gluten was a problem, but it partly was because it takes a lot of time to develop these gluten-free recipes, but also partly wasn't. It was the yeast. So I like using active dried just because it means I check my yeast before every use and I know whether it's working, because there was another time that mine kind of died on me and I was like, oh, this isn't working, so I could buy more before I made my bread. Anyway, so once that's on in the bowl, you can mix that up. I just use my KitchenAid stand mixer with the dough hook on, but you could knead it by hand too. And I do make sure to kind of scrape down the sides of my bowls. And clean up at the same time. You can see that it is quite thick. It's not completely dough-like, and I think part of that's because I accidentally but my scales messed up a little bit on me. And partly I think if you just do 50 ml less, 50 grams less at the start, so if you do 50 grams instead of 250 grams of milk to those bars, dry ingredients, that's probably benefit. But these still turn out beautiful and delicious. So at the same time, I'm just greasing up my pan to make it into it's freshly washed, and then I get it oiled up inside. And this is just a Pyrex pan. I'm not exactly sure on the dimensions, but depending on how tall you want your rolls, would depend on how big they'll be and how many you can fit into your pan. And at the same time, I'm getting some butter measured out. And I'm just making my icing, filling even for the almond rolls. So I'm doing butter. I'm not exactly sure how much butter that is. 95 grams of butter. About a teaspoon of almond extract. Depending on how much you love the almond flavour, you could go with less. Almond extract tends to be quite strong. And then I'm doing about 100 grams of sugar. You could use brown sugar if you wanted a deeper colour, but because we're doing almond rolls, I've gone with the lighter colour for these. And then I've got some ground almonds here, and I'm just doing about 2 tablespoons of ground almonds. I had this from another recipe, so I figured I would use them up from this. Well, obviously not use them all up, but use some of them. I won't say this is an imperative ingredient, but it does add to the almond flavour. And then I also add about 1 tablespoon of butter. And again, that's definitely not a vital ingredient, but it adds a nice taste to it. You could do 2 tablespoons too, I think would work. 1 tablespoon wasn't an overly apparent flavour, so I think 2 tablespoons would probably be good. I tend to be quite generous with my tablespoons of alcohol though. But anyway, I just softened down this butter in the microwave for 20 seconds or so. And then I probably should have done that before I added the rest of the ingredients, but that's fine. And then we can get this all rolled out. So yeah, I'm using, what's the name of this? Captain Morgan's. About a tablespoon worth. I would say probably do 2 tablespoons if you want the flavour to be more apparent. And then just mix that all up with a spoon. We have a nice taste. So that was our filling for our rolls. And then we can get started rolling them out. You can see it's nice and gloopy. So I'm just rolling them out on some baking paper. I initially think to myself, I'm just going to roll them out with my hands with some oil. But because it is a little bit on the wetter side, it becomes very apparent I can't do that, as you'll see. So I end up putting it back and adding flour down. Very problem with the oil is also I can get it out, but it was just sticking to the paper and I didn't want that. So I just pop it back in the bowl and then start again with some flour. You can also just roll them out with some, I would recommend the flour, but you can roll it out using a rolling pin as well. I don't know why I chose to use my hands. I would usually use a rolling pin, but I don't know, so instead I decided to use my hands, and both works. So either way, if you want to be more accurate, use a rolling pin, but if you care less about that, you can just use your hands. So now I've got some flour. This is really super easy to stretch out. And you want it to be about half an inch thick all around. I'm not sure why I had that wet. Oh, I think it's oiled. Piece of paper, kitchen towel on the parchment paper next to my desk. I think that's got oil on it, which was what I was trying to do originally, and then it switched to flour. So then I glued on the nice almond filling. And then just spread it evenly, making sure you try to get it nice and over all the way to the edges so that no part's kind of without filling. So then you can roll it all up. Mine was over the paper, so I spread it out just so that it doesn't stick or anything to the table. And then once it's rolled out, I just grab a knife and cut it up. I tried to go in the half and then half and half and half and half it, just because I find that works best for it not to be not too unevenly distributed. And I coat my knife with flour. I've just got a normal knife, like a cutlery knife here, and coat it with flour just so that it doesn't get all stuck together. So then we can cover these and let these rise. Let me just check my notes. How long did I let this rise for? Okay, so I let this rise about an hour and a half, and then we bake them at 180 for 25 minutes. So you can see there that I didn't properly place them out or anything, but they still turn out great, so it's no problem. And then we're making, as well on this day, some gluten-free tortillas, because I wanted to make quesadillas, but I never ended up finishing off the quesadillas. I just made them into wraps because I ran out of energy by the end of the evening. But that's completely fine. So the recipe that I was doing was, let me check, 240 grams of gluten-free bread flour, 40 grams of tapioca, obviously make sure that that's gluten-free as well, get that all mixed in, then 1 teaspoon xanthan gum. You can add baking powder to these if you want, but I don't tend to. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Then I add psyllium husk. I do 20 grams worth of psyllium husk. That's quite a lot. You should probably cut that down. Obviously, being gluten-free, you kind of have to check the ingredients on everything and dairy-free to make sure that everything is okay for your dietary requirements. So just make sure you do that when you're baking. Then I do about a teaspoon or so of salt. Then we add about 35 grams of oil. And I had the same thing happen with the tortillas where they were a bit wet. So 450 grams of water, but if I were you, I'd start with like 200 and slowly work your way up. Again, though, I think it was my scales, so don't worry too much about that, because I think my scales keep being slightly off, and that can be difficult. But I have put scales on my Christmas list, so hopefully someone will buy them for me, and I won't have this problem so much anymore, because I bake a lot, so I really don't need my scales breaking on me constantly. Anyway, I'm mixing that all up in my KitchenAid. So I don't start with the full 450. I slowly add it, but I still managed to end up making them a bit wet. I think because I knew I was nowhere near 450, so I just think, oh, I still need to add those, and then, But anyway, I scraped down the sides. It turns out okay in the end. Making homemade gluten-free, or just homemade tortillas in general, is the best. I've never made corn tortillas though, and I really want to. And I don't have I don't have a tortilla press, and I think that would make it a little bit easier. But I love making homemade tortillas. They just taste so much better than the shop ones. And honestly, they don't take that much effort. It felt like a lot of effort by this point on this evening because I'd already made and done so much. And I still had dinner to go, and then put the almond rolls in the oven and everything. But truly, they don't take that much effort. The tortillas alone are pretty easy to make. And again, I'm just mixing it in my KitchenAid with the dough attachment on. Then I use some just bread flour or whatever, gluten-free bread flour, to roll them out. So I put them between pieces of parchment. The first one, I don't put enough flour on the top and it gets stuck, but the rest of them from that point on are good. So I just roll them in some flour, and then I put a piece of parchment paper or baking paper on top of it as well, and then roll out using the rolling pin into a roundish shape. I'm not too picky. And you want these to be pretty thin. They do puff up a bit in the oven, and when you're frying them. And on this day I was struggling because I already had so much going, because I had the pan with the food in, and then I needed a frying pan or something to fry these in, and I couldn't find anything that I thought would work, so I ended up using a wok, which probably wasn't the best. But looking back on it, I had a crepe pan, and I think a crepe pan would probably work really good for these, so. But yeah, you can see this one does get a bit stuck, so I have to kind of patch up the hole. But the rest don't, so just make sure you've got enough flour on top so it doesn't get stuck. But I think with like pancakes, the first one fails and that's fine. And then I just... Oh no, I didn't use a wok in it, I used this pan. But either way, a crepe pan would work great if you were looking for one. You can see I've got flour all over my legs. And I've got a plate standing by ready for this to come out, and a damp dish towel. And once it's done, I get it straight under the damp cloth, and that keeps them super pliable and flexible. The mistake I do make on this day as well is when too much flour gets in the pan and not much oil, and it does create a bit of a mess, as you'll see. It gets a bit smoky. I won't smoke. So at this point I realise I need to clean this pan out because it looks like it's going to catch fire. I probably shouldn't have left the hot going, but that's okay. I clean it out and then add some oil. These are almond rolls going into the oven, and here they are coming out, super soft, fluffy and delicious, and I do get some icing on them. They do smell so good. And everyone enjoys them. Then I just get a basic kind of filling going on for the wraps with those ingredients. And I made a simple icing to go on the almond rolls, which was 50 grams of cheese, fake Free Farm Philadelphia, 50 grams icing sugar, and a quarter teaspoon of almond extract. Again, if you don't want them too almondy, you could skip the almond extract in this. And then I do add some flaked almonds on the top that I had as well. And these turn out delicious. And the dinner, I think I forget to record my dinner served up, but I do show how well the wraps turned out, and they turned out really great.
Oh, they smell good. There's some flaked almonds.
That's the finished product for the almond rolls. I never got a video of me just like kind of tearing them open like people always do, but they were so fluffy. I do have one of me cutting it with a spoon, but it's not really the same. But that's okay. And then my camera going in the background. And it actually felt really relaxing by this point, just have everything done. It just felt really good. So that's what I made to go inside the wraps. And here you can see just how pliable they are. Like, so good. Nothing like the shop bought ones. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you give some of them a try. And if you do, let me know how it goes in the comments. It was a super great evening and lots got done. And it was a great treat having these almond rolls to finish off the evening. They were just so soft and delectable. So yeah, I'm very thankful that you watched to the end. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.